I'll be happy to share that my genetics are suboptimal. I ran the strategy recently and took my 23andMe and threw it in there. And you know, it's worse than most of my patients, I'd have to say, even my autistic kids. That it just says to me, like, wow, you know, like going back, I've been living a pretty healthy lifestyle since I was 24 years old. I grew up with traditional standard. I had a nurse for a mother I took tons of antibiotics as a child. You know, I got every vaccine that I could get, you know, but I feel like the epigenetics, the way in which I bathe my genes has really made a huge difference in my personal experience. There's a lot of things that I could say, you know, yeah, I have a tendency towards because I have certain SNPs, but you know, drinking enough water and staying really hydrated, exercising regularly, having mindfulness techniques in my life, knowing what is pro-inflammatory for my body and taking care of my digestive system, right? And that happened early in life because I got so sick in my very early 20s. I had severe asthma. That's what got me into naturopathic medicine, is because I was incredibly sick.
Hello friends, it's Mike Mutzel here with HighIntensityHealth.com. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're with my friend Dr. Shelese Pratt, and we're going to talk about a myriad of different topics: genetics, epigenetics, and nutrition. But specifically, we want to overlay this discussion with how to induce neurologic plasticity, so to help your brain perform better in different ways. And Dr. Pratt, you work a lot with autistic children and also executives, helping them to operate and function better. And I think a lot of people are in this are interested in quote-unquote biohacking, right? And doing, whether it's neurofeedback, heart rate variability, there's a lot of different quote-unquote hacks. And what you do is really unique in that you're helping the brain to communicate with the body in a different way, in a better way. And that's the brain integration technique. So let's kind of introduce this idea. Maybe first someone comes to you, how do you assess which part of the brain is maybe not working? And then where do we go from there to kind of restore these pathways?
So brain integration has specific acupressure points that we assess different neurological function. So in my assessment, I'm checking how well the corpus callosum moves. Is there information happening bihemispherically? So are they using both sides of their brain at the same time? So a lot of people may be incredibly intelligent intellectually, they're very organized, but they can't integrate that with the other parts of their brain. Maybe their gestalt, maybe their creativity, and so that's a big part of what the first initial part of the assessment is doing, is finding out, are they using both sides of their brain at the same time? We're finding out if there's confusion within the brain. Are they sending information to the wrong centers, or is it not efficient in the way that they access these different centers? So some people may send information to the wrong part of the brain, and it has to go in and go out the same way, and they lose information. So that's one of the ways in the very beginning we assess. Also, do they get caught up in an emotional reaction? So these are the people that find themselves in a limbic loop. That's what we call it. And they just can't get out of it. So I'm assessing, if they get really frustrated about something, or if they get really nervous about something, can they bring back in their logic or in their emotions in a constructive way and move forward, rather than feeling caught up till they exhaust themselves in this kind of neural loop. And then some kids or adults have a problem with understanding what's in the past and what's happening today. Right? So that's part of the initial assessment, is those three areas of confusion that I just talked about, whether or not they're using both sides of their brain, and then I assess their visual processing, their auditory processing, and how well they move over the midline and coordinate and balance themselves.
Interesting.
So those are the initial, and then I can assess with reading comprehension or digit span, some of these neurological tests that tell me how their brain is functioning.
A few questions came up. The first one about the left and right hemispheres communicating properly. Would that be like, so if someone is maybe strong accounting skills, mathematics, that'd be left brain, right? So what if they like lack emotional intelligence and the ability to like interpret nonverbal cues? Would that be suggestive of not proper communication between the two hemispheres?
Sure. So there's been a lot of psychologists or neuropsych professionals that have referred patients to me for that reason. They get to a certain point in their therapy and they can't break through. And brain integration enables them to have that bihemispheric function where all of a sudden they can put their emotions into words. Say an engineer, that has a really hard time expressing himself because his neural net activity within communication has been stunted in some way. Maybe they know what they'd like to say, but they can't get it out. Or maybe they don't even know how to organize how they're feeling. Brain integration would start to integrate those pathways and help bring both sides together so they can get out what they want to say.
Yeah, that's really important. I think we're hearing more about that, the EQ, the emotional intelligence, and things like that. Very important in business and creativity, and everyone wants to be an entrepreneur and self-made and all that. So they want to create, but if there's a communication gap there, that can be a challenge, right? Then going back to this, you called it the loop.
A limbic loop.
Limbic loop. So that would be like someone gets frustrated in traffic. Or someone cuts them off and they're like wound up all day. Would that be kind of an example? Or
so take it back to when a child is 2 years old and they get upset about something and they throw a temper tantrum and they're on the floor and they're kicking their feet, and that's normal. At 2, that's completely normal. When we're 5, 10, 15, 30, 45, we should be able to control that. We should not have to get stuck and feel frustrated or depressed or anxious and completely caught up in that circle. And what brain integration does is it starts to integrate to other areas of the brain so that all of a sudden you can integrate all the information you have and feel calmer. Like, okay, my brother just knocked over my Death Star that I spent 17 hours building and it's in pieces on the floor. Well, that child can be upset for a while. I mean, that's normal, right? But then they can recover and say, I can rebuild it. And maybe I can ask my brother to build it with me, right?
That's really...
But
that
being able to organize all of that information and say, life isn't over right now, or I don't have to be angry for the next 6 hours until I exhaust myself. I don't have to let the traffic, bother me once I get to work. I can actually move on and let it go.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, so some people would generally think that's like an ego thing. Like if you can't get over something, it's your ego, there's something there, but it could just be more of like a brain integration issue where there's a limbic imbalance, right? Yes. Potentially. And that's what you would test and kind of see. And that limbic loop, I could see that maybe causing issues with relationships with, whether it's in the business world or in the personal, intimate, or child-parent relationships. If you have that going on and overreact to things and make a big deal, make it stink, that can really take a big emotional withdrawal from a bank account, if you will, and cause an issue there. So it's important that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and a lot of times people are just plain overwhelmed, right? And they can't put it all together. So it's a combination of that corpus callosum, like they can take in a lot of information and at the same time stay emotionally balanced. Be able to be flexible within that. Yes, but it can impact a variety of different ways that people function, and I think it is misunderstood in a lot of cases. Some people think, oh, this is just part of my personality. It's just really the way that they're wired at the time, and there is possibility for it to be easier. And that's what I like to say about brain integration, is that it's not that there is anything wrong with people, it's just it can be easier for people, whether it's a 2-year-old that is having a hard time walking, or a 10-year-old that can't read, or an executive that can't speak really clearly, or has a hard time focusing and attending. These things can be easier. There's nothing actually wrong with them as a person.
Which is good for people. Yeah, people like that it's malleable and that there's hope and light at the end of the tunnel, things they can do. So I want to get into like what brain integration technique is and a little bit more specifics and how we can introduce it. But what comes to mind is trauma. So we talked about like, and maybe as a protective mechanism, like we talked about like the limbic system and kind of the amygdala. And so early life trauma, maybe it's C-section or abuse, maybe that can like cause some hyperreactivity amongst the limbic system and create that loop. Is that part of what you like to look for when patients, you're doing a very thorough history to kind of see how you can help people? Do you ask questions about trauma?
I absolutely do. So it's usually in the first 7 years of life that something interrupted neurodevelopment. And it doesn't mean that that person is stunted permanently. It's like a circuit breaker that goes off. And we just need to go in and flip that back on, right? So that neural net wasn't completely made. They made it in the best way they could. So let's say, well, this is often the case, right? There's a 2-year-old and a new sibling is born, right?
Right.
A lot of parents have kids, and that child comes home and their whole world changes, right? They're like, what the heck just happened? I wasn't expecting this little person, can you take it back? And no, this person is here to stay, and yes, they cry and wake you up at night, and a 2-year-old doesn't have the logic at that point, and that's right when logic is starting to come on board neurologically. And so that child starts to behave in waves and compensate, but some of those neural nets weren't completely finished developing. That brain, when we get really stressed, the frontal lobe loses blood flow. And so what brain integration does is it reintegrates and helps neural nets, new neural nets form, and at the same time it brings blood flow to the frontal cortex.
And why is the frontal cortex so important?
Well, that's where we plan from, that's where we organize from, that's where our executive functioning comes from, prioritization and our ability to react in a way that's more socially appropriate. All of those
kind of that
things.
Emotional intelligence in a sense.
It integrates all of those things, yes.
Interesting. So there was an article in Scientific American about how poverty is associated with a smaller and thinner frontal cortex. So it could be that abuse in the home or trauma, and then malnutrition.
Yes.
I could definitely want to dive into that. So there's other factors here, but it's very interesting. So as like a parent, right, you can see how if your child is acting out and they become, it can be like a vicious cycle, right? Where if they're acting out and they're being a pain, it's like, okay, go to your room. And then it even makes the emotional trauma worse in a sense, right? So you can see how it can be spiral out of control and lead to like a permanent, that limbic loop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or they're overwhelmed. They don't have great biohemispheric function, and it doesn't take a lot of information coming at them for them to get overwhelmed and just break down. And in those cases, those kids are the ones that tend to become more emotional, especially if they don't have as much logic on board, right? So they become behavior problems when in fact they're not integrating all the areas of the brain. So what neuropsychiatrists have noticed, or neuropsych testing has shown, is when you go through brain integration, it actually can change intelligence. Not that we make any kids smarter, but we're integrating them so that they can answer the questions and they can be more present and get more out what they truly know, versus in a lot of cases, some kids get tested and they just don't have integration in certain areas, so they're not showing their intelligence there.
So like the potential's there, but they're being handicapped in a sense, and you're kind of opening that possibility up.
Exactly.
Have you noticed a correlation with early life trauma and this kind of limbic loop and this not so healthy integration with later life abuse, whether it's gambling, drugs, alcohol, and violence? Is there a correlation there in your clinical practice doing this now 15 years?
I think there is. There's a lot of things at play there.
Yeah.
I start thinking about genetics, and I think of certain SNPs that they might have in addition to that early life trauma. Yes, the amygdala gets upregulated, right? And if there's a lot of abuse in the home, then they come from that sympathetic overdrive, right, where we don't really think through. And if we've been in that pattern since the very beginning of life, it's really hard to make good choices. And so we do find ourselves in situations that are probably not optimal and that hurt us.
Yeah.
So brain integration can help them integrate, and sometimes it can help them see, the ways in which they're hurting themselves. So many, many moons ago, I saw somebody that did not tell me that they were an addict at the time that they saw me. And they went through brain integration because their girlfriend told them that they really should. And when they left, they actually called me and said, I'm aware now of my addiction and how I need to quit, and it's really intense for me. And at that point I said, well, now would be a really great time to follow up with therapists, right? To move through some of the emotions that are coming up now that you are fully using your intelligence and your brain.
That you're cognizant that the abuse is actually a problem.
Yes.
Whereas before you're like, oh, it's just part of my life, I just do this, whatever, I don't even realize that it's affecting me.
I'm compensating, I'm doing the best that I can, and these and usually it's self-medicating, right? Some of that addiction is, whether it's gambling, whether it's actually gaming, that's all dopamine related too. Whether it's, sexual, whether it's over-exercise, the seeking, this constant seeking, yes, often it can go hand in hand. Now, will brain integration change all of that? No, but it will integrate and make you more conscious of it. And then you can move on with your therapist, all of the therapy that's needed, right? And there is a nutritional, of course, part of that. Yeah, absolutely. And so, but what I've seen is that you can make the brain more active and more, just changing nutrition and the ability to process in a new way is going to change that frontal cortex. So I've seen children that do not have a corpus callosum, meaning it's very thin, that white matter, but yet they're walking, they're crawling, and they're talking, and they're reading, which wouldn't be seen in Western science oftentimes. They'd say, without that white matter going between the two hemispheres of the brain and it being thick enough, we really are concerned that this child or this adult will never function in a normal capacity. And what's beautiful is I've seen a lot of neuroplasticity happen where we actually do get that bihemispheric function, and they can walk and talk and read and spell and all the things that take bihemispheric function. So.
What do the traditional neurologists say about that?
Most of the time they look at it and say, they must have been wrong. In their testing, or oftentimes they say go to your faith. They don't really understand it because it doesn't fit their model.
Yeah. And
when we're looking at it from a point of view of energy function versus, that there's an energy function, not just a physical mass function, then it starts to open up different possibilities.
You mentioned energy, and that kind of reminded me of this idea that maybe once we get the brain working, there's a higher level of awareness. And I don't want to use the word mindfulness, but that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. So there's this better awareness of your environment, your emotions, and better ability to kind of anticipate, I shouldn't react in this situation. I should calm down. Okay, my older brother knocked this over. I'm going to be okay for the moment and not have a fit. So that's what we're trying to do, is just create that next level of awareness in a sense, yeah?
Yes, create a response rather than a reaction, right? Be able to take a deep breath and come from a more stable place. So the brain is more stable neurologically once you go through brain integration. But meditation is incredibly important. Mindfulness exercises are so important. I have mentioned before that it's really important in this incredibly distractible world that we still remember to breathe. I send my patients home all the time saying, I want you to set your phone and I want you to put an alarm on it. And when that alarm goes off, you take a drink of water, because most people need more water, and you take 10 really deep mindful breaths to a count of 6 in, hold it to a count of 6, breath out to a count of 6, hold it to a count of 6, and do 10. And it's amazing where we can come from, even after brain integration, when we come from a place where we're actually getting more oxygen and bringing in the parasympathetic, so we can, again, respond rather than react. But brain integration does help with that. I think nutrition and balancing neurochemistry is, again, important. And having the awareness, the body awareness, to know when you're dysregulated.
Well, so I definitely want to dive into meditation more, nutrition more, but I don't know that we really defined how you assess,
Sure.
And the meridian system, okay, someone hits you in an elevator, says, Dr. Pratt, what is brain integration technique using the meridian system? So let's talk about that.
Okay, so there are different neurological pathways that are associated with different acupressure points in the body and certain modes that we hold from the Indian chakra system. So it's a combination of those two things that Western neurology overlays the whole modality of brain integration. So in the beginning, there's certain points on the body that in the assessment that I go through, right, to test what percentage do you have access to these areas? How well are these neurological pathways working for you? So it's through a series where I touch different acupressure points on your body and I actually do use applied kinesiology muscle testing in order to find out what those percentages are to the access to those areas. And so I test probably 15 different areas in that initial assessment. And then there's 84 different formats that I go through in the standard brain integration when I'm actually doing the therapy itself.
And so once you find maybe a deficiency of sorts, just to use that word, or not deficiency, a neurological pathway that's not firing optimally, let's say, right? And it correlates with the limbic system, whether prefrontal cortex, whatever.
Sure.
Then you'll go back and kind of massage it. Is it manual therapy on that meridian or no?
It's holding different neurovascular points and acupressure points on the head. So I may go through and put in a series of points on your torso and then sit down and hold different points on the back of your head and the right above your eyes. So I'm bringing blood flow at that time. That's a frontal occipital hold, brings more blood flow to the frontal lobe at that time. So it's a balance through that system. So it's locking in the neurological pathway that we're working with and then holding different neurovascular points to bring blood flow and balance and open up those neurological pathways.
That's fascinating. There's an osteopathic technique. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but you kind of squeezing different points in the brain. Is it similar to that?
No, it's unique own. I'm not squeezing any certain centers. In fact, a lot of people don't understand the depth of what's going on because it looks pretty minimal. This therapy actually doesn't look like a lot is happening, but there is a lot happening because I'm touching different areas and then I'm sitting down and holding the same neurovascular points each time, which, in the occiput and the front of the head. So that's where I'm holding, but I'm not massaging those points. I'm just holding those points until I feel a pulse. And when I feel that pulse, which it's not a vascular pulse, it's an energetic pulse, then I know that balance is complete and I get up and I reassess and check.
Awesome. That's really cool. So you were sharing a story about an executive that had made it pretty far in life, was doing well seemingly financially and in his work place, but was having issues. And then after the technique, there was a lot of carryover into his life. Why don't you share that story? I think it's pretty fascinating.
There's been a lot. I've seen a lot of Wall Street people and I've seen a lot of executives, and a lot of them, have a lot going on in their lives. They're constantly bombarded with information. They're trying to organize, they're trying to project, they're trying to see what's coming next. And so one of these particular people that I'm thinking of right now, he went through brain integration. He used to fall asleep on the train every day into work from Connecticut to Manhattan. And he actually called me and said, I no longer get my naps anymore, Dr. Pratt, because I used to fall asleep every time I was reading and only retain, part of it and then fall asleep. And now I'm retaining it and I can actually project into the future what I'm seeing, right? I can organize myself. I can actually hear the details and organize them and use those details in order to make faster decisions and see things before my peers. So that's the way an executive, he was already very highly functioning. He had gone to like an Ivy League school and done very well and got a great job on Wall Street, but yet at that point he was showing that he had compensated in many ways, and now nothing was holding him back.
You mentioned that word compensated. I think it's interesting to bring up. If you read some of these business books, like I can't remember names of individuals right at this point, but there's a lot of individuals that have made very significant advances in business and monetary aspects, have had a form of dyslexia or anything else, so they compensated or so. Is it a common finding? Because I know just to back up a little bit, because you travel out to the Northeast quite a bit in Connecticut and work with a lot of folks in Manhattan and that are on Wall Street, right? So have you found that?
It's very common. It's incredibly common. And nobody wants to admit when they're struggling at something, especially the ego, as we talked about before. The ego wants to be like, I'm perfect, everything's great, I'm doing great, like, look at me, especially on the East Coast. That's pretty important. Yeah, these people do their very best that they can, but there is a threshold at which they can get to. And often optimization, whether it's through nutrition, whether it's through mindfulness, or whether it's through brain integration, all brings out really the very best of them. And yeah, they can process.
Yeah. Interesting.
more efficiently.
Love it. All right. So I feel like we really kind of tackled neuroplasticity in a sense and gave people some insights here. I want to transition a little bit, Dr. Pratt, into genetics and this whole notion that if I have this bad gene, then I'm doomed, that I have to take all these supplements. And the lifestyle stuff is, maybe when I get to it. But the supplements are the most important thing that I can do to like restore my health. And we know that's far from the truth. So let's talk about your genetics.
So, I mean, I'll be happy to share that my genetics are suboptimal. You know, I ran the Strategene recently and took my 23andMe and threw it in there. And, you know, it's worse than most of my patients, I'd have to say, even my autistic kids. It's way worse. But, you know, that it just says to me, like, wow, you know, like going back, I've been living a pretty healthy lifestyle since I was 24 years old. I grew up with traditional standard. I had a nurse for a mother who I took tons of antibiotics as a child. You know, I got every vaccine that I could get, you know, hepatitis B, and I remember having reactions to the hepatitis B, but nobody really knew what to say or do about any of that. And now looking at my genetics, I understand why. But I feel like the epigenetics, the way in which I bathe my genes has really made a huge difference in my personal experience. There's a lot of things that I could say, you know, I have a tendency towards because I have certain SNPs, but you know, drinking enough water and staying really hydrated, exercising regularly, having mindfulness techniques in my life, eating, you know, knowing what is pro-inflammatory for my body and taking care of my digestive system, right? And that happened early in life because I got so sick in my very early 20s. I had severe asthma. That's what got me into naturopathic medicine, is because I was incredibly sick. And really it was my diet. You know, I was eating a typical diet of macaroni and cheese, sometimes with tuna and mushroom soups, Campbell's, you know, MSG filled soup. And what I was bathing my genes in was making me sick. I was really sick all the time, and it was changing my lifestyle that made such a big difference. And yes, there are certain nutritional supplements. I had so many deficiencies, and I had so much in excess that, you know, balancing all of that out, whether it was through sleep or exercise or nutrition, mindfulness exercises, all of that led to health. And I think it is important. I mean, I see a lot of really incredibly sick people that have, you know, some of the same SNPs, and I think that predisposes them, but lifestyle should also be a mainstay of really clinical practice for all of us. You know, making sure we stay true to really working on the digestive system, making sure that they drink plenty of water, making sure exercise is, because so a lot of my peers talk about fatty liver disease and the genetic SNPs that go with that. And I think there are genetic SNPs that go with that, but if we exercise really well, we stay hydrated, we eat the right foods, then it's so much easier to take the nutrients like maybe phosphatidylcholine or maybe changing the diet to having enough protein and vegetables and that right balance that can really make a big difference for them. But it's fine-tuning with supplements rather than counting on supplements to really drive the biochemistry in, right?
Right.
It's so much more sophisticated. Our bodies are so much wiser than a few metabolic SNPs and giving a bunch of supplements for just those.
Yeah, it's really important because I think a lot of people have this doom and gloom mentality when they get their genes back and they look at it like, oh my gosh, I have this, so I'm going to be depressed or I'm going to have, like, sure. But you have, so we talked DAO, COMT, like all the clinically relevant SNPs that are problematic, and functional medicine doctors are like, oh my gosh, you have all those.
I have them all.
But you're very healthy, high functioning, busy practice, 5 children.
5 kids.
Doing a lot of stuff, right? And no one would ever know. So I think it's important that we're having this conversation.
Yes, I mean, my genetics are really messy. In fact, I kind of had to give my parents a call and say, listen,
what are you guys doing to me?
You got all this going on too, but you know, like I want to give people hope. Like, listen, like just because you have all these SNPs, just because your genetics look this way doesn't mean, it doesn't mean your life is going to go down that path.
It's not determinism.
No, you have so many wonderful ways you can hack into that, and you can look like you're the pillar of health, right? my husband looked at my genes and he was like, wow, now I see how lifestyle really has served.
Yeah.
Right?
So for him, he was like, I thought you were being weird with all these things, and now it makes sense, yeah?
I don't think he necessarily thought I was weird, but sometimes he thought, do we have to go that far? Do we have to get in the infrared sauna on a regular basis? Do we have to have, purified water? Do we really need to be concerned about whether or not we live on a golf course? These type of things, like environmental toxicity. And I'd say, yes, they're really important. They add up over time. And I lived on a golf course for a long time.
Wow, okay, interesting. I didn't know that.
And I was healthy, but I think it could have set me up for a lot of disaster if my lifestyle was different. If I was still eating the Campbell's soup, if I didn't pay attention to all of the pro-inflammatory foods that could be just taking me down, if I didn't take the time to have a mindfulness practice where I really bathe my system in breath, right? So I feel like there's no pill for taking deep breaths.
No way. It would be nice. It sure would, hey?
It would. I mean, there's a lot of people that would benefit from that and love to take it, especially that live a really chaotic lifestyle where we're always hurried, we're always moving on to the next thing, and reminding ourselves, wow, that's robbing us of oxygen, which we really need for so many reasons, but our mitochondria does not work well,
without it.
Without a lot of deep breaths and enough CoQ10 and all of the other great nutrients we need. So, yes. So I want to tell everybody out there, just because your genes are maybe a disaster and you're struggling with some really hard autoimmune disease or some condition that not a lot of people have found a lot of answers for, there are answers out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a little time to unravel. It's not just take one thing and you're going to be better tomorrow. But over time, I've seen some pretty amazing things happen for people.
Right. So have an open mindset. Realize that your body's plastic and constantly moving and adapting. And so your inputs affect the way that your genes are expressed and the structure of them via the epigenome. Awesome. So I think a few of our listeners are going to say, okay, she mentioned golf course. What's wrong with living near a golf course? Let's talk about that.
Well, so they use incredible amounts of pesticides to keep that golf course so green and lush and beautiful. So they're constantly spilling chemicals and it's getting into the water supply, right? We also had a lake that was a recreational lake that they pulled water from that was around the golf course that I was always skeptical and really cautious about letting my kids play in because it had all the runoff from everything they were using on that golf course to keep it so beautiful. Yeah, exactly. Frogs with like 5 legs.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I actually didn't ever see one, but
right. We're just kidding here.
But the seaweed that was growing in that was the most lush seaweed that you've ever seen in your life, in that lake. So it was definitely causing. All of those pesticides end up causing all kinds of problems for our genetics, and they have a lot of heavy metals in them. So my kids also have the same genes that I passed on to them, so we have to be cautious, right, about not having heavy pesticide use or of the organophosphates or the heavy metals that block up, methylation. So
yeah, important point. So at the last ShyCon event, Steph and Jennis talked about like the heat-induced sweating as a way to get the heavy metals out and these maybe endocrine disrupting chemicals, organophosphates from the golf course and whatnot. What strategies do you find to be most important, as or preventative? So you do have the dirty or the bad genes. Okay, so you mentioned sauna and the food. What else is there?
Well, you can upregulate liver detoxification, right? Making sure liver both pathways are doing well, phase 1 and phase 2. I may have mentioned it, but exercise is paramount. So just keep moving, get your lymphatic system moving. I use old nature cure techniques. I still tell people to dry skin brush before bed, really light strokes all towards the heart. I still tell people to do castor oil packs. Again, that helps the liver detoxify, it helps the immune system. tonify, it helps the lymphatic system move, and it helps the GI heal. So castor oil packs, I mean, that's going back.
But I'm not familiar. We've never talked about that.
Okay, sure.
You give us an overview? I think this is important.
Castor oil packs?
Yeah.
So you take an organic wool or cotton cloth, you saturate it in castor oil to the point where, again, it's saturated but not dripping. You put it from your abdomen. I mean, women can take it over the breast all the way down to the pubic bone. And men really, I mean, you can take it just as far, but it's going to help with fibrocystic breast disease or lymphatic movement within the breast if you cover, as a woman, if you cover from that point. And then you want it to come on either side so that you have the liver covered, which is on the right side underneath the ribs. And then what I tell my patients to do is wrap up in an old towel. Right, with the cast. Yeah, because it's going to get messy. It's going to stain all your sheets or anything that's around. So you wrap up in a towel and then you put a hot water bottle over it and you lay flat, maybe with your feet up if you can, and then you either meditate or do deep breathing. If you really can't do any of those things, you can read a book, I suppose.
No CNN?
No, that's the last thing I would ask people to do. Yeah. But anyway, laying there for 45 minutes, and they will probably have one of the best nights of sleep of their life.
Interesting. So it's 45 minutes. And the
45 minutes is the best. If they start to break out in a rash, which some people that are really toxic and hold a lot of toxicity in their liver may break out in a little bit of a rash, and then they want to back down the time. They don't want to stop, but they want to back down the time. But you don't want to do that if you're pregnant, because you're really detoxifying, and you don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that if they're bleeding, because it increases bleeding.
So if we want to put on our allopathic mechanism of action cap here, is castor oil like DMSO in a sense? Like, how is it working?
It's really encouraging the lymphatic system. It's a lymph mover. Okay. So that's part of it, which the lymph system is a sewer system of the body. So we want to move that. And it's, I'd have to look at the science behind how it does liver detoxification. But it also works as a great anti-inflammatory. So it's really trying to bring down inflammation, and you're soaking it through your skin at a slower absorption rate. So I'm never telling people to take it internally. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that say castor oil and it brings back bad memories if you're of a certain age, because they used to discipline children with castor oil.
Interesting.
Because it's a cathartic laxative. It also initiates labor if you take it internally, but that's not how we're dosing it at all. We're dosing it slowly through the skin over time. Yeah. And so that little bit through the skin, which our largest organ is our skin, is going to give you just the right amount that's going to bring down inflammation. So I also use it on patients, castor oil, that have, say, a knee that they tore ligaments, or they're trying to heal from some kind of injury that's swollen. And if you rub castor oil on it, it often brings down the inflammation.
That's really awesome. Okay. That's
old nature cure.
Right. A lot of naturopathic doctors I met over the last 10 years have castor oil in their clinic. And I thought about the cathartic aspect, but you mentioned, but yeah, it's very, very interesting. So another kind of ancient detoxification remedy, if you will, or modality is coffee enemas.
Sure.
What do you think about those?
If done correctly, they're great. Some people use them too much. And some people get a little overstimulated by them, but I don't use them very often in my practice, but that's an old hydrotherapy nature cure that I think is also worth looking at.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Shelese, this has been really fun. I have a few final questions here that we've asked every guest on the show. The first one is your morning routine. So you have the 5 kids, busy practice, beautiful Colorado here. We'll show some behind the scenes shots. Do you have a morning routine, or do you encourage your patients to do some sort of activities in the morning?
Sure. So the first thing that I'd say is the best thing that I do when I get up in the morning is my very first mindset is, what's going to happen today that's going to be beautiful, right? So I set my day in motion with the idea that anything can happen today and it's going to be a beautiful day, no matter what comes up. I am a faithful person, so I ask for that grace. So that's the very first thing that hits me in the morning. And then I try to sit for 20 minutes and work with my breath, work with a certain mantra to keep my mind and make myself available to my body, to my mind, to my spirit. On a
Real quick, you
Sure.
said mantra. So is that like Vedic meditation or transcendental, or you're just mindful?
I've done both. So it's Hamsa. That's the one that I do.
Haven't heard of that.
And a Sa. They're just it's probably a Vedic. It's a Vedic mantra.
Does the Hamsa mean anything?
It probably does, and somebody has told me that in the past, but at the moment I can't remember.
No worries.
And it's really not about the mantra as much as it is about just calming and having something to focus on. So it is more transcendental in that way. I have done...
Vipassana, the other insight, it's more just mindful. Okay.
Yeah, or bringing your awareness just to your breath and watching, the thoughts go by, right? Just watching it all like clouds or trains, the cars, and then you just let them go. Like, oh yeah, I was focusing on that, now I'm gonna let it go.
No attachment.
No attachment.
Yeah. So I interrupted you. You're very grateful. The day's gonna be awesome. We're gonna sit for 20 minutes.
Yep. Sit for 20 minutes, and then, I am the mother of 5 and have a family, so then that's usually when the dogs started and things like that. But on a perfect day, I'd also get in the sauna after that. I'd like to start my day like having a sauna and then taking a shower and making breakfast, getting that really good green smoothie in, some protein, and
nice.
Hitting the road.
Sounds awesome. So you mentioned exercise, and we talked about like brain plasticity, how exercise is really good for the brain and getting out in nature. There's only one exercise modality or that you could do. What would it be and why?
Well, it's the one that I do, and I do a lot of yoga. Just because it incorporates so much of what my body needs, which is I need that breath. I need to come back to that prana. I find that I hold a lot of tension in my body. Now I could say that's my COMT snip or my MAO-A snip, or the fact that, I also have histamines that are going on, and I have MTHFR, and I have them all, really. I probably have. I could pull it all out. But I feel like that stretching, that breath, and whether it's Vinyasa or it's more restorative, like I come back to that seems like the sweet spot to me now. I love hiking too. I have 2 dogs, and I take them, and I love being in nature. I tell people all the time the antioxidants you can get from being in dirt is better than, again, any pill that you could take. So I try to do that twice a week, but if I had to pick one, doing some Vinyasa every day is life-changing for me. For the last 20 years I've done yoga, and it's served me in every way that I could imagine. So.
Yeah. There's one consistent finding with interviewing on 180 practitioners is yoga is like the bridge to meditation. And so a lot of people realize like, wow, that calm feeling after I do yoga, I want to achieve that without having to get sweaty for 45 minutes, and sitting really helps with that. So really interesting. So do you go to a studio or do you practice at home?
I do both. For the longest time, and I still prefer, I have my teachers that I love, and I love community, and I love the energy that's created in the room when everybody's breathing together and really trying to shift their consciousness. And if you study yoga long enough, you realize it's really to get to the sitting. That's really what it's all about, is to, almost give the body enough where it can just relax and the mind can be free, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I do both. When I'm traveling, because I do a lot of traveling, I will do Vinyasa on my mat at a hotel. But I'll find classes all over. I've met wonderful yoga instructors all over the world by dropping into classes, because you can find yoga anywhere now. Yeah,
which is so awesome. And you're right, you meet the coolest people, and the different teachers and the modalities and the energy and how they touch you is like all different. So it's really, really cool. Love that, Shelese. So let's talk about your favorite supplement, herb, or nutrient. So there's just one thing. You're on a desert island. Vitamin D, omega-3s are covered. What are you bringing with you?
That's a hard one. Eleuthero's up there, just because it's my friend. Ashwagandha is a good one, but my favorite, probably Eleuthero.
Which is like ginseng, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be the American ginseng, not so much stimulatory.
It's the adaptogenic quality of it. It's the ability for it to serve so many organ systems and bring them all into balance and harmony. So that's why I choose that one.
Love it. There's a lot of good benefits. A lot of practitioners do gravitate towards the adaptogens. So final question, and the idea, kind of the backstory in this question, is to get you to articulate the most important health thing that you feel could help people on a cultural level. So if you were to bump shoulders with a politician, Donald Trump maybe, or a parliament member of a European country, maybe someone from the World Health Organization, and just had 30 seconds in like an elevator type setting to share with them one thing that you would want them to maybe influence policy around, or at least have stitched in their mind that is really powerful in terms of a health fix for a societal level, what would that be and why?
It's the ability for us to make policies that truly protect us rather than being bought out by big companies and the amount of toxicity that's put in our air, our water, our food. So it's kind of a bigger topic than that, because I feel like in the last 30 years, that's been our biggest setback, is the amount of toxicity, and one of the reasons why I think more neurological and more health autoimmune is occurring is because of our amount of toxicity and our quality of food. So as far as a politician, that would be the first thing I'd talk to a politician about. If it were the general public, it would be remember that the simple things are the biggest things that you can do for yourself. Drinking enough water, eating really clean, really homemade food, and exercising. And making exercise fun.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So sorry I couldn't wrap it into one.
Yeah, no, I think what I inferred from that is you would like politicians to understand, like, okay, profits from companies are good, and like, you know, political action committees and so on, but we need to look at our health at first before we start introducing all these new to nature chemicals that have a huge impact, not only on adults, but most importantly on children to be in preconception, because all of the developmental epigenetic issues, which is scary. And these environmental chemicals, I'm inserting my own bias here, persist in the environment for a very long time. They're hard to clean up. And so it's easier to kind of like stop it from being introduced as opposed to waiting to, oh, we'll clean it up later, or we'll worry about the side effects later. So,
or not even worry about them at all. They'll just go away, right?
Yeah. And the world's a big place.
It's just the dirt, right? Yeah. It's not a big deal.
The animals, they're tough. They'll evolve.
Right?
Shelese, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for coming on the show. If folks want to connect with you online, what's the best online resource?
Well, probably my website, which is www.drprattnd.com. So drprattnd.com.
Awesome. Thanks again. This was a lot of fun. Folks, if you enjoyed this show, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll put the links to Dr. Pratt's clinical practice and more information about brain integration technique on the comments section below this video. And please subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more and watch more cutting edge health videos like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.